On this Sunday night, the loss of life is staggering even to veteran investigators. 20 people killed in a single tragic crash. It was supposed to be a celebration. They even rented a limo so no one drove drunk. So how did a day out in New York State end with the most deadly accident in the U.S. in 9 years? Also tonight, an outspoken columnist enters a Saudi consulate and then vanishes. Was he murdered? And with Brett Kavanaugh on the court and Americans deeply divided, we look at what comes next. The first cases he will face, what his controversial confirmation means for the midterms. This is The National. At a time when people on both sides of the border are in the middle of a long weekend out with friends or family, taking in the fall colors, a single stunning car accident has devastated several families in New York State. A limousine filled with friends en route to a birthday party never got there. It happened in the small town of Schoharie, New York, about 3 hours south of the Ontario border. Our Renee Filipponi explains what happened.
It started off as a day to celebrate a birthday and ended up in unimaginable tragedy.
There's 20 fatalities. It's just horrific. I've been on the board for 12 years, and this is one of the biggest loss of lives that we've seen in a long, long time.
It all unfolded when the limo lost control on a very steep highway and blew through a stop sign, right across the intersection and into a store parking lot. It hit an empty SUV. Then that vehicle careened into two pedestrians, killing them. The limo was carrying a group of friends, ringing in a 30th birthday. 4 sisters died in the crash. Their aunt says their father is broken.
I don't know how to say it. You can't wrap your head around such a tragedy where you have 4 of your daughters die. They loved their family. They loved their parents. One has 2 little children and one has 1 child.
2 couples who were married just this summer also died. Alex and Amy Steenberg rented the limo in an effort to be responsible and not drink and drive. They were joined by Aaron and Shane McGowan. The newlyweds are being remembered as loving people that were fun to be around.
Aaron and Shane, honestly, are both just, the life of the room. They, very up people, positive, outgoing.
An investigation is now underway, and police say they will be looking at a number of factors, including seatbelts.
The front seat passengers and the driver would be required to wear a seatbelt. The passengers in the back would not.
Now only a tire remains at the place where flowers are being laid to remember the 20 people who died and the dozens of lives who are now changed forever.
Renee, any sense about how this might have happened?
Well, Adrian, no one questions that limo blew through the stop sign. What investigators really want to know now is why. Now, the limo was a 2001 Ford Explorer limousine like this one, and police will be looking at the safety record of that vehicle and the company that rented it. They'll also investigate whether the driver may have been speeding, distracted, or under the influence. Now, residents in the area say this intersection is dangerous and it's been a problem in the past. The National Transportation Safety Board is on the scene, and they are there not just to find out what happened, but to see if there are any gaps in safety standards to make sure a tragedy on this scale never happens again.
Okay, thanks, Renee. Renee Filipponi in Vancouver tonight. So if this accident makes you wonder about standards and rules here in Canada, well, limo licenses are granted by municipalities. So in Toronto, for example, limo drivers are required to have a special license and the vehicle has to be inspected every 6 months. And to that question, they'll be asking in the U.S. about seatbelts. In Canada, it's provincial rules that govern the use of them. In Ontario, when fewer than 8 people are in a vehicle, seatbelts are mandatory. When there are more in, say, buses or bigger limos, there's no requirement to buckle up. Here's what else we're working on tonight on The National. He received thousands of dollars in unexpected EI payments and then got dinged with a huge tax bill. Now he's going public. Plus, pot goes legal in just 10 days. So what happens to the thousands of Canadians with criminal records for possession? You'll meet one of them just ahead. But first, he's been missing for days. So is Jamal Khashoggi dead? He is a prominent Saudi dissident and journalist known for sharply criticizing Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. Now, last week, Khashoggi disappeared without a trace, and as Derek Stoffel reports, many now fear the kingdom had him killed.
Inside this building, the Saudi consulate in Istanbul, that's where Turkish officials say a hit squad was sent. A team of up to 15 people dispatched to kill this Saudi national and Washington Post columnist. Jamal Khashoggi is an outspoken and well-known critic of the kingdom, a man once close to the circles of power in Saudi Arabia, who more recently harshly criticized the royal family and the vast powers they wield.
I got fired from my job twice as an editor of a leading Saudi paper.
In self-imposed exile in the United States, Khashoggi spoke to CBC News earlier this year.
It's a total closure when it comes to political and human rights activities in Saudi Arabia. There is a change in social and religious fronts, but not when it comes to politics and human rights.
Now, friends and colleagues fear he's dead.
Fakat detaylarını söylemediler.
This journalist says Turkish officials told him Khashoggi was murdered, but provided no proof. Khashoggi went to the consulate last Tuesday to get some documents needed to marry a Turkish woman. His fiancée says she waited 11 hours outside the building, but he never came out. The Saudis, however, are adamant, saying Khashoggi was not killed and that he must have left the building. They took journalists on a tour through the consulate, opening up cabinets, even closets, trying to prove that Khashoggi is not there. We are working to search for him, says the consul general, and we are worried about his case. Khashoggi is an opinion columnist for the Washington Post. This is what the paper published a few days ago to mark his disappearance.
This news, if true, has us all completely devastated. This is an attack on us as well at the Washington Post.
An investigation is now underway to try to find Jamal Khashoggi. If he's found dead, the Saudis will face intense global criticism, and relations between Turkey and the kingdom, already strained, will hit a new low. Derek Stoffel, CBC News, Jerusalem.
So Khashoggi once supported many of Mohammed bin Salman's reforms before becoming disaffected with his rule. The National spoke with him in March about Saudi Arabia's problems and his own worries about the dangers of pointing them out. Have a listen.
It was better for me to leave, and actually right after I left, arrests began to happen. Many of my acquaintances, friends, colleagues were rounded up, and I always regret being away from home, but when I see what happened to them, I think I did the right choice. I have conflicted feelings about the situation. I like many of the things MBS is doing. Actually, I called for openness. I called for an end to corruption, an end to radicalism. But at the same time, I feel that we are shifting from Salafi or religious radicalism to nationalist radicalism, that you must like what I do, otherwise you are a traitor. And that is not the healthy environment that I was hoping for. Right now, there is no room for any political dissent, for any political counter-opinions.
The Canadian government has responded to all this, though without much detail. A spokesperson for Global Affairs issued a statement saying, "We are aware and concerned by these reports. Canadian officials are actively seeking more information." But if this is proven to be a political killing, what might Canada say or do then? Not sure, but keep in mind, Canadian influence in Saudi Arabia is pretty weak right now. Relations tanked back in August after Canada tweeted a plea in Arabic urging for the immediate release of Saudi women's rights activists. The Saudis were infuriated and within hours started punishing Canada economically and politically, canceling flights, ordering investments be pulled, and Saudi students sent home from Canadian universities. They also recalled their ambassador and ordered Canadian Ambassador Dennis Horak out of his post in Riyadh. Now, Horak has been silent about what happened until now.
To sort of drop a tweet, as we did, in a vacuum with no bilateral relationship really to speak of. It's not effective, and it has repercussions. It left us vulnerable, and that's where we ended up.
In an exclusive interview airing this Tuesday on The National, Horak talks about the price he thinks Canada paid to make a political point.
If we don't have a relationship that allows us to go and talk to the people at the most senior levels, we're just yelling from the sidelines. We're yelling at people, get off our lawn.
How the rift happened, what Canada can do about it, we get into all of it Tuesday exclusively on The National. To the U.S. now, where this was the moment Republicans had been waiting for decades. When Brett Kavanaugh was sworn in late last night, conservatives locked down their first solid majority on the U.S. Supreme Court since the 1930s. But oh, what it took to get there. You can still taste the bitterness of the fight over Kavanaugh in Washington, indeed across the country. And as Paul Hunter reports, it's not likely to leave anytime soon.
Highlighting the fury in this country over Brett Kavanaugh, watch as a demonstrator sprays water at his convoy in disgust after Kavanaugh was sworn into the Supreme Court yesterday.
I am happy as a clam.
Today, Republicans, from Senator Lindsey Graham to Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, offered a different view. While critics say the sexual assault allegations against Kavanaugh leave the court in a deeply politicized shadow, Republicans underline the right guy got the job.
I'm happy that those who tried to destroy his life fell short.
We stood up to the mob. We established that the presumption of innocence is still important.
Meanwhile, Democrats emphasize none of this will be set aside.
He's going to be on the Supreme Court with a huge taint and a big asterisk after his name.
The next battlefield is the looming midterm elections. Days after mocking Kavanaugh's accuser, last night Donald Trump blamed Democrats for obstructing Kavanaugh's confirmation and urged his supporters to be sure to get out and vote against them.
You don't hand matches to an arsonist, and you don't give power to an angry left-wing mob, and that's what they've become.
The bitterness of the Kavanaugh debate has left many in this country frustrated and disillusioned with lawmakers.
November is coming!
Among those voicing that now, the Republican governor of Ohio.
The pox on both houses for the way this was conducted, and people in the country are appalled. That's because it's like, I got to win and you got to lose.
And it's amid all that Brett Kavanaugh now takes his seat at the Supreme Court. He's expected to be in place by Tuesday, in a country still deeply divided over whether he should even be there at all. Paul Hunter, CBC News, Washington.
Within moments, it seemed, of the Senate confirmation vote to affirm Brett Kavanaugh as the next Supreme Court justice, he was sworn in. So why so fast? And what sort of cases await him on the bench? For that, we're joined by Alicia Bannon of the Brennan Center for Justice in New York, which advocates in part for voting rights. I know, Alicia, that you once clerked for Justice Sonia Sotomayor, who went on to be an Obama-era appointee to the Supreme Court. He now joins her on that bench right away on Tuesday. What is your gut about the most controversial cases he'll likely see in his first session?
Well, the U.S. Supreme Court is just starting its new term. It runs from October to June. Right now, we don't have too many blockbusters on the calendar. You know, on his first day on Tuesday, he's going to be hearing 2 cases interpreting a particular criminal statute. There are some cases, though, that are coming down the pipeline that look likely to land on the court's docket this term. One has to do with partisan gerrymandering, whether courts can step in and make states redraw their maps when they draw extreme partisan maps in district lines for congressional seats or state legislative seats. Another case that may be coming down the pipeline has to do with whether or not our anti-discrimination laws protect people on the basis of sexual orientation. So if a person is fired from their job because they're gay, whether or not they're protected.
Is there any indication of how he would likely rule on that particular one?
So one thing that's important to note is that his predecessor, Justice Kennedy, was a real swing vote on the U.S. Supreme Court. So we have a court that's consistently been ruling in a lot of high salience cases on a 5-4 basis. So sometimes ruling with the left side of the court, sometimes ruling with the right. And very often Justice Kennedy was that swing vote. So Justice Kavanaugh is going to be entering into a court that has been, very frequently divided on a 5-4 basis. On the particular cases, partisan gerrymandering or LGBT rights, his record is pretty thin. He didn't hear any cases on those issues as a lower court judge, so we don't know a lot about his thinking on those particular issues. But looking at other cases that he's heard as a lower court judge, as well as writing and speeches that he's given, we have a strong indication that he is, on many issues at least, a very conservative judge, far to the right of Justice Kennedy. So I think we are teed up to see a court move quite sharply rightward with Justice Kavanaugh.
Okay, Alicia Bannon, thanks very much.
Thank you.
Canada is zooming towards its own legal revolution. 10 days from now, recreational pot becomes legal to smoke and to carry around. So what happens to the 500,000 Canadians who've already been convicted of possession? Well, the NDP has tabled a private member's bill to have those records expunged, but as Briar Stewart explains, even if it passes, for many Canadians, that might not change much.
This greenhouse is where we have our potted plants.
Bob Woolsey grows marijuana to help alleviate his chronic pain. He first started using cannabis recreationally in his teens, and in the 1970s was charged with possession 3 times.
It really controlled how I approached the rest of my life. I had to look for jobs where they didn't require bonding, where they didn't require any sort of criminal check.
When recreational marijuana is legal, adults will be able to carry up to 30 grams. That's why some legal experts believe those old convictions for possession should be cleared from criminal records. Under the current system, many can apply to have their convictions suspended, but most don't because of the cost and time involved.
A lot of the people who have suffered from cannabis prohibition come from vulnerable communities, and having access to that kind of money and the sophistication to take themselves through the process can be a real barrier.
Case number and then the felony.
That's what happened in California after marijuana was legalized. People weren't filling out the paperwork, so now the court there will do it automatically.
So now jurisdictions across the state are automating this process so that folks are no longer having to go through the long, tough process of petitioning on their own.
The Canadian government says it will look at how to handle past convictions for minor possession once legal marijuana is fully in place.
The buds are set.
Woolsey believes Canada shouldn't stop there. He wants them to look at trafficking as well. That's what he was charged with in 2015 when the RCMP shut down an unregulated dispensary he was running.
They want to erase all the cannabis records right back to the 30s, get rid of them all.
But even if some records are erased in this country, they will remain on American databases. Woolsey has been stopped at the border before, and he isn't hopeful that a change in Canada will make it any easier to enter the U.S. Briar Stewart, CBC News, Desroches, BC.
Some other developing stories we're keeping an eye on tonight. That's about an estimated 3,000 people who marched in Montreal today. They're opposed to the incoming Quebec government's vow to ban the wearing of hijabs and other religious symbols in the workplace. They are also protesting the plan to reduce the number of immigrants allowed into the province. And in Brazil tonight, the far-right leader Jair Bolsonaro is a giant step closer to the presidency. He took a commanding lead over his competitor despite a near-fatal stabbing last month. Bolsonaro's promised a crackdown on crime and corruption. A runoff election will be held on the 28th. Still ahead on the National, UFC fans are used to seeing bloody brawls inside the cage, but last night the punches flew outside. What that means for the future of the sport ahead. Plus, why a cafe owner whose business was devastated by those tornadoes in Ottawa and Gatineau has a lot to be thankful for this weekend. And for almost 15 years, rapper and activist MIA has been taking pop political. Tonight, she sounds off in our Sunday interview.
When you come to England, they hadn't had Sri Lankan refugees before. So when we landed, people didn't know what we were.
So what kinds of stuff did you find here on the beach today?
I found like garbage bags, like
a bunch of plastic
wrappers,
water bottles, tissue paper.
So today we have students from local schools. Right now on the beach is Ron Colley, he's grade 5, and it's World Oceans Day here at Middle Cove Beach. So the grade 5s are really wonderful to work with because they love to get in and do the activities, but they also make the connection between the activity and the ocean and the science of it. So on the beach here today, we have the Ocean Science Center. The dive team are down here getting live creatures and sort of bringing them up in front of the kids to see. And we have a team from DFO also here doing activity on marine debris because oceans plastics is sort of the theme of this World Oceans Day.
How does it make you feel when you find garbage on a beautiful beach like this?
Sad because, like, knowing that it affects fish because they swallow the plastic.
It's important because if we don't do this, a lot of the garbage, fish could eat it and then it could get caught in the organs and they can't eat, they can't breathe.
Surprised you just how much plastic you found in a place like this?
Yeah. It looks really clean, but then when you look around, you find a bunch of like trash around and then you're like, wow.
What have you guys been teaching the kids about the oceans in classroom before you got to this stage?
Lots of discussions about awareness of the marine life and respect for them and the importance of keeping our oceans clean and caring for them like we do every other part of our world. It's amazing actually, right from when they start school, even sooner, they're aware of how important that is. So there are future generations, so teach them now, put it into practice, and that's what we're here to do today.
Does it make you think differently about the kinds of things that you buy and shop for in your everyday life?
Yeah, you could like buy reusable stuff. Like reusable bags, reusable water bottles, like all that. And less plastic stuff. I don't think that takeout places should use styrofoam because you really don't need it when you could just be using other stuff to put it in. When you eat like takeout and stuff, you don't have to have the plastic stuff on top.
We should make more reusable things and people should buy water bottles instead of the plastic ones. They should buy metal ones or the reusable plastic ones.
And they could do more things like this to teach kids how they can do ways to prevent that. Because really it's for our fault and it's affecting us a lot.
Thousands of dollars in EI benefits. The government asked for it back, fair enough. But that's when bureaucracy conspired with sheer absurdity and nearly cost him thousands. Rosa Marcatelli from our Go Public team explains what happened.
I didn't do anything wrong.
But he still had to pay. That's what officials told Zbigniew Kazmiukczuk after a government blunder put more than $14,000 worth of employment insurance payments into his checking account. He knew straight away he'd have to pay it back, but he never imagined he'd also be on the hook for thousands extra in taxes.
Canada Services admitted that there was no fault on my account, yet I had to give back to the government over $2,000.
When we first met up with Zig, as he's known, he'd been laid off for a few months from his IT job. He'd applied for employment insurance and was told because he had a severance package, he wasn't eligible until 2019. But in May, Service Canada paid out anyway, then wanted the money back plus those taxes. Zig paid to avoid penalties, then filed 2 appeals to try to get the taxes back. Both were denied.
Basically, their whole position is that they do everything according to the procedures. What kind of procedures is that? That if I didn't get a penny from EI, they ask me for $2,000 more in return. I mean, that's unbelievable.
This taxpayers advocate says he often sees examples of bureaucratic rules that defy common sense.
The issue here is there was a mistake that was made by Service Canada, and it should be on Service Canada to fix that mistake. It should not be on a totally innocent party that has nothing to do with the fact Service Canada screwed up.
Go Public found the government incorrectly paid out or underpaid $239.5 million worth of EI benefits in the one-year period between 2016 and 2017. We also found many government agencies are failing to meet their own service standards. That includes processing times for claims, dealing with appeals, and especially access to call center agents. The government is trying to fix itself. In April, it introduced an initiative to improve services for Canadians. After Go Public contacted the government, it reversed its decision and returned the $2,000. Service Canada says it was able to do a refund through what's called a tax reversal, only because Zig's overpayment happened and then was discovered within the same calendar year. The government also told us that option was overlooked when Zig was trying to resolve the issue himself with the government. Rosa Marcatelli, CBC News, Calgary.
If you have a story you want investigated, email us please at gopublic@cbc.ca. Next on The National, we go in-depth with our Sunday interview why rapper and activist MIA just needs to make her music political.
I think it's interesting when people are like, why are you talking about this? You know, just why do you want to talk about the fact that you came from the council flat or you're a refugee?
The last half-century has been the most turbulent in world history, and it has seen a veritable revolution in how we get the news. 50 years ago, we got it almost totally from newspapers. Today, most of us get the news from television. Since it began on that first day of January 1941, the CBC News Service has played a key role in the journalistic transformation of how we get the news. So to mark its 50th birthday, we'll take a fast gallop through those years, looking at some of the events, some of the issues, and some of the people of CBC News.
It is a broken country down here, drab and desolate. A country of scrub and second growth, of rock. Rock, relentless, hard, cruel hard.
For Canadians, this was the birth of broadcast news in action, live on the scene. J. Frank Willis was reporting to Canada and to an international radio hookup at a dramatic mine rescue at Moose River, Nova Scotia. It was the beginning of live broadcast journalism in Canada, and it stimulated the Canadian appetite for broadcast news.
This is for the world. They have been saved. They're out of the mine.
That same year, radio crackled with the news of King Edward VIII abdicating his throne.
You must believe me when I tell you that I have found it impossible to carry the heavy burden of responsibility without the help and support of the woman I love.
Charles Jennings, the CBC's first anchorman, reported on those stories and on the march to war. His son is today ABC anchorman Peter Jennings. The outbreak of war really intensified Canadian interest in broadcast news. It was the story of the century as correspondents scrambled to report the latest developments. But at the start, the CBC was surprisingly calm. When Canada formally declared war, the CBC interrupted a lunchtime NBC music program it was carrying to read a Canadian press bulletin. That done, the CBC went back to the NBC music show, picking up the strains of Inka-Dinka-Doo. But the war quickly made the CBC realize it had to broadcast more news. As Hitler rampaged through Europe, Canadians wanted to hear the latest developments. At the time, the news agency Canadian Press wrote all the CBC newscasts, since the CBC didn't have its own news service. The finished scripts to be broadcast were rushed from the Canadian Press offices by bicycle couriers to the CBC studios.
hear my story. I'm going to show you my story.
This is no typical music documentary, and of course not. MIA is no typical musician. The British Sri Lankan rapper is known as much for her politics as she is for her playlist. Her career has been about moving the goalposts, the culture of identity politics, the desire to be heard, and getting people to listen. All of that is stamped across a new film, Matange Maya, MIA. It opened this weekend in Canada.
To make a sound. New York, quiet down, I need to make a sound.
From the moment she burst onto the music scene in 2004, MIA's voice has been unapologetically fierce and fiercely unapologetic.
You wanna go, you wanna win a war. Like PLO, I don't surrender.
Stirring controversy with her lyrics and her videos, and not one to pass up the opportunity of a big stage to make a big statement.
Super Bowl showdown over the big game's blockbuster halftime show. The NFL is now suing rapper MIA, but instead of issuing an apology, MIA is fighting back.
The bigger the spotlight, the more MIA has stood up for the causes that drive her. From the global migrant crisis to women driving in Saudi Arabia.
Live fast, die young, bad girls do it well. Live fast, die young, bad girls do it well.
What experience are we allowed to share from these places? You've got access to a microphone. Please use it to say something.
I fly like paper, get high like planes. If you catch me at the border, I got visas in my name.
Always at the core of her music and her activism, her life as a Tamil refugee who grew up in London.
That song about stereotypes that's attached to like immigrants and stuff like that is that they come and take the jobs and take the money.
Born Matange Arupragasam, she grew up as part of the ethnic minority Tamil community in northern Sri Lanka. Her father was one of the founders of the Tamil resistance in the lead up to a 25-year civil war. That conflict forced her to flee when she was just 10.
When I was there, the war just started. So I remember it not being conscious of the fact that you're Tamil, and then suddenly being really conscious of it because the war just started. So then when you come to England, they hadn't had Sri Lankan refugees before. So when we landed, people didn't know what we were. They had the Brixton riots in '81, and 4 years later, you come and it's still, there was a lot of racist tension, you know. So yeah, it was just like learning that, oh, you're something else and it's not even the thing that you really are. And you're just sort of lumped in this category of brown.
Matange became Maya, a refugee with an ambition to become a documentary filmmaker. How Maya then became MIA started with a phone call on the day she graduated from art school.
I got a phone call saying my cousin is MIA. And he and I went to school together when I was in Sri Lanka. And when he went MIA, I felt really guilty by that, you know, that somebody my age was, and my favorite cousin had to make that decision to fight for, you know, his people, and that I was outside an art school, just graduating with a fine art degree and didn't know what to do with it, you know. And it just sort of really knocked me sideways, you know. And that was the first time I felt really connected to back home to Sri Lanka and the concept of people like me and people my age and what they were doing there. And I needed to go and investigate.
When
I was your age, I used to live in this room.
What started as a journey to reconnect with her family and find her cousin who went missing during the war became something much bigger.
That's you, and that's my little brother. 2 out of 6 boys are dead.
There's a genocide going on. I felt that I'd not anticipated how terrible the situation was. I think every day there was a new event and I was learning new things, and the government had just bought these new fighter planes from Israel, the MiG-23 planes, and they were going on like a 3-week offensive in Jaffna, which is the town I came from, which is why even in the movie, though I go to Sri Lanka, I still don't go back to my actual house in Jaffna because the government was bombing it every day.
And they've bombed the airport.
Bloody world is looking at this. I don't understand.
Even if I hear serious things like murders and rapes and genocide, it's still disposable, useless, and pointless, because nobody's doing anything about it.
That was really an eye-opening moment for me, and that's why I was like, oh, this needs more attention and this needs more help internationally.
So that's effectively the origin story of MIA, a nod to the cousin she never found and the people she left behind. She made it her purpose to tell the world what was happening to Tamils in Sri Lanka, and that led to her most controversial video. This video for her song Born Free was temporarily banned from YouTube for its graphic nature. It was MIA's way of recreating real, uncensored videos of executions in Sri Lanka, replacing Tamils with redheads in America, just to get her message across.
I need to keep the immigrant story in all my work, always, because that is what I'm trying to make sense of. We're used as a scapegoat for Brexit. We're used as a scapegoat to build a wall. But people have always mixed and mingled and moved, and interesting things happen because of it. So, yeah, I think it's interesting when people are like, why are you talking about this? You know, just why do you want to talk about the fact that you came from the council flat or you're a refugee? Like, you know, just like be creative without having to talk about those things. But yeah, I'm just an artist that draws on real life and real experiences.
Next on The National, 24-year-old Stefan Alexis has put his life on hold to help his parents care for his younger brother, Tor. We take an intimate look at his life in our Seen and Heard series.
It's easy ignoring these people because there's no voice. Because the people that have the voice are too tired to like raise their voices. They're already exhausted from the day-to-day, and they don't have the energy to go out and protest.
But first, in case you missed it, Conor McGregor's triumphant return to the UFC last night was not exactly triumphant for him, or for those fighting to defend the legitimacy of the sport. All right, sure, that looks like classic WrestleMania, but unlike pro wrestling, what erupted after last night's UFC lightweight title fight wasn't scripted, though some call it pretty predictable. After months of tension, defending champ Khabib Nurmagomedov beat Conor McGregor in the octagon. Then he leapt over the fence and attacked McGregor's crew. Then Khabib's boys entered the ring and went after McGregor himself, even though the fight was over. In the end, 3 people were arrested. Chaotic, of course, surprising. Not according to those who follow UFC.
If something happens, like what happened in April when Conor McGregor flew to Brooklyn from Ireland with a bunch of his mates and decided to attack a bus that carried Khabib, then the UFC could have said, right, we're not going to condone this. Or they can just say, right, you know what, we're going to make as much money as possible from this. And that's what they did. But if that's the path you're going to go down, then you can't be shocked and surprised when something like this happens.
Khabib's $2 million payday is now in question, pending an investigation, so not great for him, nor UFC head Dana White, who's taking heat for letting things get so ugly. But for UFC's more extreme fans, maybe last night's madness was the payday.
Shots that you kind of dreamed and wished that you could have gotten, you can now actually do. The shot that I chose is a shot of Parliament Hill taken with a drone, and it's powerful to me because it's a view that people have never seen before. In the past, to get aerial shots, we would have to hire a helicopter and it would be very expensive. But now you can get your own aerial shots anywhere from 2 feet off the ground to 400 feet in the air, and it's totally opened up a whole canvas of extra angles that you can get. The Peace Tower at Parliament Hill, it's a stationary building, so in order to make that more interesting, you kind of had to add some motion, and in switching lenses, we were able to get different looks. My favorite shot of the Peace Tower was coming across the water from the Gatineau side, and that was a view that I'm just not used to seeing of Parliament Hill, and at a height that I've never seen before either.
All the hairs in the back of your neck they just stand up, and you just know you're somewhere special. For anybody who has never been to the gravesites in Europe, Vimy and Beaumont Hamel for me because of where I'm from, when you approach that monument, just driving through the towns, you see all the Canadian flags, and it just makes you proud to be a Canadian. The foreground just gives you that separation between what you're trying to compose, and the separation is what makes it all work. It really stands out. I think the advantage that we have is to bring somebody where they can never go. And a scene or a shot, that's what television does.
It's a story about human trafficking and being lured into the sex trade. The image that I've picked is a portrait of a woman whose identity couldn't be revealed. She's this intensely strong person who has literally been through hell, but revisits it, kind of reopens that wound on a daily basis so that she can help other people. I think you can literally see the curtain kind of come up, and it stops about here. And in the picture, it's the sun obscuring her face, but sort of the device is there, and it's sort of slowly creeping up, and maybe eventually it'll be gone altogether. An image is powerful when it connects with the viewer. It's what's going to make you want to spend time with the story. I hope that viewers of the photo and people who go into that story will come away with a sense of hopefulness that this that at the end of the day, it's kind of a good news story, and that this person has been able to turn this really dark experience around. She is beautiful. She's a very attractive person and confident, and I think that confidence comes through in the photo. All I really did was show up and push the button.
Tonight on our Seen and Heard series, an intimate portrait of sacrifice and brotherly love. Stefan Alexis has put his life on hold to care for his younger brother Tor, who has cerebral palsy. Many young Canadians have a similar story. More than 250,000 of them care for a loved one, sometimes at the expense of their own future. So here's what it's like caring for Tor.
You okay? I remember when we were at the hospital very clearly. We waited there for a while, and then my dad came out and he was like, "Your brother's here." I got to see him from the class. I remember seeing other kids that were Tor's age, and they were crawling and walking, and I was like, so when is Tor gonna start walking and talking? They're like, probably you won't be able to walk and talk. I must have been at around 4 or 5 years old when I realized that things were a little different. is Stefan Alexis, 24 years old. This is a team effort. There we go. It tickles. I'm a young caregiver. I take care of my younger sibling, Torrance. He's 21 years old and he has cerebral palsy. He's not verbal. He doesn't really have any balance. He's completely dependent. You wanna go to bed? You wanna go to bed? It's not an easy job. He needs you for everything. So you have to be taking care of him 24/7. I think Tor sees the world simpler than we see it. So I feel like he appreciates the things that we take for granted. We think he sees the world in lights and shapes. Okay, buddy. A year ago when Tor turned 21, he graduated from high school and all the services stopped. So when that happened, we didn't have any support during the day. You're doing well. And all the work kind of fell on my dad.
Yeah, you should be hungry though.
So that's when I was like, okay, I have to help. Mom's working full time, has her hands full, taking care of the house too, so I'm here. Even though I wasn't like feeling great, you make sacrifices for your family. When people think about a caregiver, they generally think about a female. It's a very easy assumption to make and a very easy picture to paint. Watching my dad taking care of Tor has impacted me in a pretty significant way because he's shown me the other side of masculinity. He teaches me how you're supposed to be attentive to certain things and how you're supposed to like take care of your family.
So I'm picking up, okay, passata sauce, pepperoni, spinach, eggs. I'll be back.
When you're taking care of a family member, the house revolves around that family member. So you kind of have to coordinate who's gonna stay and who's gonna go out because it's like an orchestra. So you have to kind of get everything in a certain balance.
Time to go to bed, Torrance. Come on, sweetheart, turn around.
There's so many little intricate details that go not into like just everyday life, but into a life where you're taking care of someone else.
Jesus loves me. The Bible tells me so.
We love Tor to death. We love him unconditionally. We would do anything for him, of course, but any kind of long, continuous strain has an impact on you mentally. My friends are aiming towards like their career and they're chasing like their dreams and all that. Having to put my goals and aspirations on the back burner can be really frustrating. I can't do this forever. It's a tough place to be in because Like, what do I pick? Like, how do I choose? What will happen, like, if I'm not there to kind of relieve the pressure? Everyone's getting older and the needs are going up, and it's breaking the balance. He just had a really bad seizure.
You did? Okay. Let me come on, give you a hand.
If I can't be here, like, physically to help, I need to find another way to help out. It's easy ignoring these people because there's no voice. Because the people that have the voice are too tired to, like, raise their voices. They're already exhausted from the day-to-day, and they don't have the energy to go out and protest. Yes. And try and, like, fight the government and, like, lobby and do all this crazy stuff, because, like, the day-to-day never really stops. You don't have the energy because you're just trying to make it day-to-day.
That was just one chapter in our Seen and Heard series. Each one gives you an intimate look at a young person leading an extraordinary life. You can check them out at youtube.com/CBC The National.
The World Wars, Korea, Vietnam, wars far removed from Canada's First Peoples. White man's battles, some said, on battlefields in foreign lands. But the wars reached into Indian, Inuit, and Métis homes across the country. Aboriginal men and women volunteered in the thousands. Many sacrificed their Indian status to do so. Many sacrificed their lives.
Over 6,000 Aboriginal people joined the armed forces during World War II. For many, the threat of Nazism expanding to this country seemed very, very real. But even while they were fighting fascism on the front lines, Aboriginal soldiers were fighting racism at home.
Harry and Teresa both grew up in the prairies, both in Métis settlements on the fringes of white society. The Métis knew about battles. Their enemies were poverty, tuberculosis, and indifference.
We get up at 6 o'clock in the morning and go to bed at whenever the sun goes down, just to make a living, just to put food on the table. There was no money involved. There was nothing. There was nothing there for us.
I come home crying once. I told my mother, and she says, "What's the matter with you?" You know, and I says, "Well, they beat me up outside. They're after me." And he says, "What for?" I says, "Well, they call me dirty, stinking Indian." And he says, "Go on away, you know. You tell them kids over there that your great-grandfather was pure white, you know."
While Canada ignored Aboriginal calls for help, the Aboriginal people answered Canada's. Some were thirsty for adventure. Some felt a duty to defend the Queen who had signed their treaties. Others wanted 3 square meals a day.
Our whole community enlisted. All the guys were gone, and there was not very many young people left. And the older guys went too. I mean, the married people went. I mean, our community was devastated.
My father says, "Well," he says, "you're a man, you're a soldier, you're fighting for your country." And that's the words that he said. And he dug in his pocket and pulled out 52 cents, put it on the table. He says, now go and get a bottle of Catawba wine.
For 18-year-old Harry, whose father Joseph was a World War I vet, the war brought the first taste of alcohol and the first taste of equality.
It's the first time in my life I had any clothes that I could talk about. So, they give me boots, and they give me soap, and they give me a towel, and all them things that help us every day.
Teresa's brother, George Dion, enlisted immediately. When Teresa signed up, 18 years old, she didn't want anyone to know she was Métis.
If you told anybody you were Métis, that you weren't accepted into their circle, and we always strive to be accepted, of course.
Teresa served in the Women's Corps, posted in Alberta. Harry went overseas, spent 2 years in England.
As a homicide investigator, you're not very often delivering good news.
I have carried the scars of this case my whole life.
I will never forget.
One of the hardest things I've had to do in 33 years on the job.
It's traumatic for anybody to come home to find a loved one is murdered.
We can't right the wrong. All we can do is find the truth. This is the most I've ever talked about it to anybody.
I will never, ever be the same.
Here are some stories we'll be watching on the National this week. Are you ready for the second royal wedding of the year? Sure you are. Princess Eugenie marries Jack Brooksbank on Friday. Now, she's the younger daughter of Prince Andrew and the Duchess of York. He is the manager of a tequila brand. Their wedding at St. George's Chapel won't have quite the hoopla of Harry and Meghan's ceremony in that very chapel. For economists around the world, this is Christmas Eve. They will wake up tomorrow learning who has won the Nobel Prize. We will also be hearing from Nadia Murad. The Yazidi human rights activist is speaking to the media tomorrow for the first time since being named a co-winner of the 2018 Nobel Peace Prize.
Imagine if I never met the broskies. God's plan. God's plan.
So, God's plan? Drake might be hoping God's plan includes an American Music Award. The Canadian megastar is up for 8 awards Tuesday night, including Artist of the Year. Fellow Canadian Shawn Mendes will be performing on the show. An Ottawa business is giving thanks this holiday weekend. The Heart and Soul Cafe, so aptly named, was damaged during the 6 tornadoes that tore through the community almost 2 weeks ago. They've been working hard to get back up and running ever since. They managed to open their doors to community leaders and loyal customers just in time for Thanksgiving. And that, of course, is our moment of the day.
For this Thanksgiving, I'd have to say me and the family are just happy that we managed to get it open. We chose this weekend to open strictly because we wanted to get it done as quickly as possible. We wanted to get back open for the customers. We were really busy this opening. We had an incredible turnout. It's been an incredibly long couple of weeks just trying to rebuild the sensibility of normal, get everybody back to work and get everything organized, cleaned up. There was such a great turnout of volunteers and everybody there just doing what it had to be done to help out and get everything back to the way it was. I'm also thankful that I actually have a roof over my head because frankly, I got off lucky compared to a lot of people out here, and I just hope that the volunteering keeps going and we get this community back together again as soon as possible.
So a couple of things you need to know about this place. It's been open for decades. They fed people even at the worst of times, and you may have seen a picture of a tree sort of collapsing onto what looked like a tent there. That was a yurt that controlled or housed their gift shop. Because they had no power, they luckily sent someone home from that yurt just about half an hour before the tornado. So lots of mercies to be thankful for today. That is the National for Sunday, October the 7th. Good night.